Rona sunk by German Air Force. Loss of over 1,000 U.S. troops.
Public Relations urgently recommends immediate disclosure.
Casualty families are comparing notes with letters from survivors. It's highly desirable to announce this loss of American troops.
It is quite possible that the enemy is unaware of the success of their attack. It is therefore preferred that no announcement be made.
When we got on this old tub, man, it was rusty. It looked horrible. Paint was peeling off. It's Rona.
The rats were coming down the gangplank as we were going up. And you could flake off the paint like that. Flick it off.
There was no reason to let a ship in that condition even leave the harbor. It should have been inspected.
Yeah, the best we could see, it looked pretty shaky, and that didn't do much for our morale and confidence. It was a big ship, but it looked like it was pretty bad shape.
The top side of the ship looked good. There was not a problem up there, except that all of the lifeboats were rusted shut, and we couldn't use them.
Release mechanism was frozen solid with rust. And I took my helmet and I started pounding on him. And my helmet looked like a tin can when I got done, but I couldn't break them loose.
It was a relic that should have been in a junkyard, in my estimation.
We had gotten instructions from the United States Army telling us not to talk about this ship, ever.
We could see the bombers, boy, they were coming across. There must have been about 30 or 35 of them, I don't know exactly how many.
I could hear the Rona firing back at the airplanes that were dropping the bombs. I could hear the bombs that they had a lot of them that missed. You could hear them exploding out in the ocean.
Some of the bombs hit close by, and we knew what was going on. And then there was a lull, and we figured we'd made it. But all was quiet, and the gun stopped.
A few guys pulled out their rosary beads, but everybody was completely silent, just sweating it out.
One later on came back. Lone aircraft came back.
When the attack began, I was up on deck, and I watched everything, including the German plane that released the radio-controlled glider bomb with a joystick. Once he dropped that radio-controlled glider bomb, that glider bomb turned and steered right into us. And he was controlling it. I didn't know at the time, but he was.
I saw this, what I thought was a pursuit craft. Stubby wings, on fire. That fire was a rocket engine, and this thing was coming straight at our ship. The thing that's burned in my memory most is the day they finally got a roster from Washington and lined us up and called the roll. The deafening silence when there was no answer. And that happened for 1,000 or so men. They weren't there anymore. The impact of it really hit hard when you knew how many we had lost. We knew how many in our little group of 20, we lost 12. So we knew what had happened a little bit. Nobody gave us any details until later.
They would fly in formation and they would peel off and attack, and then they would regroup afterwards, which is what most of the planes did, except for Major Doctorman. He broke away from the formation and decided to make his own personal attack, which I guess in a way was a violation of orders right there. But he just simply said he wanted to have a hit.
At that time, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Chiang Kai-shek were meeting in Cairo, and they were notified immediately of the attack. And through their counseling one another, it was determined that that would be top secret security. Don't let anybody talk about it.
Well, the troop commander got us all together and said, this whole incident is classified secret, and you're not to talk about it to anybody.
Sworn to secrecy, you don't tell anyone.
If you were to write home about it, you would be subject to court-martial.
This whole incident is classified secret, and you're not to talk about it to anybody.
Sworn to secrecy, you don't tell anyone.
If you were to write home about it, you would be subject to court-martial.
It was 1939. A riverside town in New Jersey by the name of South River was busy digging itself out of the Depression. Young and ambitious, Joseph Pajinski was in his senior year at South River High School when he started working nights at a Main Street department store. While Joe was busy selling shoes at his new job, an Austrian scientist by the name of Dr. Herbert Wagner was busy with his own job, designing a radio-guided missile. His brilliant mind was engrossed in missile technology for years before he became a missile design engineer at an aircraft company who was under contract with Nazi Germany. As the graduating class of South River was smiling for pictures and Joe was heading down the aisle to receive his high school diploma back in New Jersey, a pilot in training by the name of Hans Doctorman received his own diploma, graduating top in his class at an airline school in Germany. A year later, the pilot, now known as Captain Hans Doctorman, was chosen for an elite group of pilots to train and experiment with Hitler's new guided missile called the HS-293. At 21 years old, the draft age in 1942, Joe Pajinski was recently married and on his way to basic training for the U.S. Army.
Dear Mom, it's been a long time since I last wrote you. You'll have to excuse me because we have such little time to ourselves. I can no longer tell you anything we do here. Every little thing is a military secret. I was promoted to sergeant last Thursday and it made me very happy. I guess I'll say so long for now, but we'll write again soon. Your loving son, Sergeant Joe.
The rookie soldier's first day of war started off the coast of North Africa, where he boarded a British transport ship called the HMT Rona, along with 2,000 other U.S. soldiers on Thanksgiving Day, 1943. The following day, the German pilot Captain Hans Doctermann, now the commander of a bomber plane, launched a new high-tech missile. This new missile, the HS-293, designed by no other than scientist Dr. Herbert Wagner, was guided straight into the side of the HMT Rona.
The bomb was moving at something like 500 miles an hour, so it was pretty fast and coming straight at us.
Bomb exploded, that wood splintered and it flew around like spears. You should see some of the bodies were impaled with 4x4s, 2x4s, right through their body. You couldn't walk the deck, it was so bloody.
Burned in my mind is looking back and seeing this huge hole, which I and others described big enough to drive a Mack truck through, and on the flames, and you could see the boys, some of them were running and trying to get out, and some didn't.
I could hear men out there. The words I could hear was, Mama, Mama.
The War Department classified the attack, ordering all survivors to remain silent. The guided missile attack was erased from history, along with the 1,000 soldiers who died that day when the burning ship sunk to the bottom of the sea. 18 months later, Dr. Herbert Wagner surrendered to a U.S. Navy intelligence team. He was then smuggled out of Germany and flown to Washington, D.C. The U.S. War Department considered Dr. Wagner as a man with skills unmatched anywhere in the world. His knowledge was so critical to the development of missile technology that special agents brought Wagner back to the U.S. and inducted him into a secret program. He was swiftly employed at the brand new Missile Test Center in California.
Dr. Herbert Wagner was rushed to the U.S. This is even before Hitler had taken his own life. We badly wanted Wagner's expertise in fighting the Japanese in the Pacific.
The pilot commanding the bomber plane, who had just been promoted to major, didn't fare as well. Major Doctermann was captured and imprisoned by the British Army. After the war ended, he was released and returned to Germany. Major Doctermann carried the burden of the attack for the rest of his life, stating, "The war will never be over in my mind until the day I die."
He was very remorseful at what he had done, and he cried when he tried to talk about it. He asked his grandson, would he apologize on his behalf?
I know of this disaster from the words of my grandfather, Major Hans Doctermann. He never wanted to be a bomber pilot. He was told he may just have an accident if he didn't follow orders. I now carry not his burden, but his blood, and the knowledge that war is hell for all sides.
6 months after the attack, Joe's mother received a telegram from the War Department stating that Sergeant Joseph Pajinski died. The telegram also stated, "No information available."
One night we were watching television, and it was a war story, and it was a ship that was going down, and my husband was crying. And I said, "Oh, Fred, it's just a story." He said, "But that happened to me." So, excuse me, that's how I found out about the Rona.
Losing 1,000 people, how could you cover that up? But they did.
May those bones around her rusty hull forever rest in peace. And the men who sailed the Rona have their page in history.
Most of the times when we talk about World War II, we think about the events that happened on December 7th, 1941, okay, and that's the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Specifically, the USS Arizona, who lost about almost 1,200 sailors and Marines on that day, all right? When we talk about World War II, we think about maybe the Battle of Midway, all right? Maybe D-Day. But due to the classified nature of what happened in November 1943 of the Rona, most of us never heard about this, myself included, all right? Today, we are fortunate enough to have one of 3 remaining survivors of the HMT Rona here with us to talk to you all about the events that happened in November 1943. If you could please stand and join me in welcoming Mr. Gurman.
Mr. Gurman? Great. Thank you. All set, sweetie? Thank you.
All right, what's going to happen is some ground rules of how this is going to go. We have quite a few questions from the students in various classes. I'm going to have a cadet walking around with the microphone and handing it off to you all when it's time to ask your question, okay? When you do that, I ask that you please just raise your hand. The cadet will come to you, hand you the microphone, and if you can please make sure you talk clear, all right, loud enough for us to hear. People like me, I'm starting to lose my hearing, so I have a hard time, so I might ask you to repeat it again. And then if you could just remain standing while Mr. Gurman answers your question, and then you go ahead and sit down, then the next student can raise their hand and ask the question, all right? We're gonna start off with a cadet, all right? So a cadet will be the first one to answer or ask a question. Who's it gonna be? All right, go ahead and stand up.
After the attack on HMT Rona, with the majority of the U.S. forces killed or wounded.
I wonder if you could speak up. I limited to one ear.
After the attack on HMT Rona, with the majority of the U.S. forces killed or wounded, did you, with the remaining survivors, go back, or did you join a unit to go back and build the base in India for the bombers?
So he's saying, after the attack on the Rona, did you carry on to accomplish the mission in India by building the runways for the B-29 bombers?
Well, the B-29s had come into India waiting for us to show up, and our final destination was to be China. However, with the large loss of specialists of all types and the delay in finding a ship to take the balance of us to India, and fortunately for the Marine Corps, they came along and took an airport on Tinian Island, which was a much better place for the B-29s to operate from. So they took off from India and flew to Tinian, and when we all finally got to India, were divided up and sent to various stations to perform whatever we were trained for. I flew up to the very border of Burma, 40 miles from Jap-held territory, to a base called Dinjan, where the Flying Tigers operated out of. And my specialty at that time was as a propeller specialist. However, I received an injury. I'm sorry, I re-injured an injury that I happened to get in the States, and I could not do that work anymore. So I was assigned to an oxygen unit, which they had just formed, and we received a couple of large trailers from the States in which the machinery for manufacturing oxygen was made. And for the balance of the war, I was in charge of a group and made oxygen 24/7 because they needed every bit of it, because we serviced Burma, China, and India. And finally, when the Japs surrendered, I had enough time in the service and points, and finally arrived January 1st, 1946, coming up the Henry Hudson, and that beautiful statue was wonderful to see.
Assuming that you were traveling with other British Navy ships, why did it take 6 hours for a cargo ship to find you and not another British Navy ship?
Could you repeat that to me, please?
Asking, you were traveling with other British ships along with the Rona. How come it took 6 hours for a cargo ship to save you and not one of the other British ships that were traveling with you?
In the 26-ship convoy, 2 of the 26 ships were designated for the purpose of picking up survivors if we were attacked, and they were in the correct place to pick up the survivors who made it off the ship and didn't drown, because the drown rate was terrible, because practically all of the 2,000 troops had never received instructions in an abandoning a ship. It was utter chaos. And when I came on deck, my first sergeant grabbed me, who knew that I had worked in the shipyard prior to my joining, and said, "I need help. They're afraid to abandon the ship." So I lined up several other guys all the way to the railing, and as they came up out of the hold, I instructed them to move their waist belt up under their armpits. Those waist belts were not the type of unit that they should have issued. We should have had the K-Bach jackets. Those waist belts were originally designed for troops on the small landing crafts because they had a pack on their back. So the only place you could put the unit was on your waist. Anyways, we finally finished with everyone that came up out of the hold. And the next thing, my first sergeant asked me to see if I could launch the 5-man life rafts attached to the railing. And he gave me a knife so I could quickly cut the ropes that secured the life rafts. Unfortunately, from 1939 to the day of the attack, whenever the Rona was in port, the native crew that just did odds and ends always took buckets of paint and just slapped more paint on more paint and actually glued the 5-man life rafts to the railing. So it was difficult, but I did about 15 to 20 down to where the ship was on fire, and that was the end of that job. And I then came back and was asked if I could release the 25-man life rafts, which were on rails on the cargo, above the cargo deck. And as the picture mentioned, or I mentioned in the picture that you watched, my helmet became like a crushed beer can or tin can. Someone finally got me a fire axe, and it was tough doing, but the sad part of it, there were GIs floating in the water, and they were holding their hands up, yelling, "Let it go." And a few of the guys that helped me were yelling to them, "Get out of the way." And finally, I was ordered to launch. And I don't know whether it was 1/6 or whatever, but I killed some guys in the water. I guess, I hope I answered your question well.
All right, at this time, hands up, please, if you have a question. We have one right over there.
If you had a choice in hindsight, would you have went onto that ship, or did you feel that it shaped you as who you are today?
You repeat?
He's asking, in hindsight, if you had the option to go on or not, would you have chosen one or the other? And do you feel like the events that happened in November of 1943 really create who you are today?
Would you say that again to me, please?
Okay, so the first part, in hindsight, if you had the option to not go on the ship, would you have not go on the ship? Would you have not gone on the ship?
Well, I don't think I had. You did what you were ordered to do. I mean, you took orders. You never questioned it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And the second part of the question is, how has that shaped who you are today?
How?
How the being on the Rona and going through that experience, how has that shaped who you are and how you live the rest of your life?
Well, I always was positive, and I feel I've had a wonderful life. How I got to 99 and 3/4. I only have 3 months to go to 100. I've had a good life. I got family here rooting me on.
right there?
Were you allowed to talk about the events that happened on the Rona as soon as the war ended? And if not, how long did it take before you were able to talk about it?
Okay, sir, she's asking, when were you able to describe and tell family members and others about what happened on the Rona?
Well, when I came home, they knew I had been in some sort of engagement, and I really didn't talk about it, got really involved in it too well, because I was focusing on my new bride and focusing on making a decent living and focusing on having a nice family. So I really didn't think about it much until every Thanksgiving came around, and slowly started putting together why was it so chaotic for us, and started doing a lot of research. However, it really came alive in the year 2000 on Tom Brokaw's nightly news broadcast. His voice got very solemn, and the next thing he said, and now for the best kept secret of World War II, the sinking of the Rona. And as it appeared on the film, the same thing happened to me. I ran into the den because we used to listen to his broadcast, and the picture was split in half, was alive, and the other was just a photo of the exact angle of the ship as it was slowly sliding down into Davy Jones' locker. And my wife ran in to see what I was watching, and she says, "What's that?" I said, "I was on that ship," and I started to cry. And just the news getting out around the country started to open up a lot of people's eyes and ears, and we formed an organization that also exists today. And as they said before, there are only 3 of us left. Unfortunately, the other 2 live in Florida. They don't know each other, but the gentleman who has been putting the film together called me and wanted to have a 4-way conversation over the phone. And finally he called me back about a month later and said, "We're not going to have the conversation because the other 2 unfortunately have possibly dementia, and there's no reason to have the conversation."
Did you have any way of communicating with the people on shore?
Talking when he was out at sea? So when you were out at sea, did you have any ways of communicating with the people on shore?
We were 20 miles away from Tunis in Tunisia. There was no way of contacting anyone there. We lost all power on the ship. Everything went dead from the explosion. The pumps, the engines, everything and anything that was operable went dead. The only communication was visually with other ships.
Can you tell us how you got off the ship yourself, the experience you had in the water, and then how you got rescued?
What was that?
He's asking, can you tell us specifically about how you got off of the ship, your experience once you was in the water, and how you were rescued?
Well, I was one of 4 soldiers who remained to the very end. I did a lot with wounded lying on the deck. We used ropes to lower them into the water. There were no lifeboats that had worked. All the lifeboats either broke apart being lowered, and there's no way for approximately 22 lifeboats, of which the report says 16 got away, but they all floundered. I actually saw as one was being lowered, I think they call it block and tackle, and the thing froze on one end of the lifeboat, and in a short time, the lifeboat was vertical and just dumped all the wounded in the water. Anyways, finally, one of the ship's officers came up to me and said, "You better get off the ship, Yank. She's going down fast." I was so busy doing whatever I could, I didn't realize that the ship was already at an angle. So I took off my helmet. Someone got me another helmet during the episode, and took off my jacket and kicked off my shoes and crawled up to the bow and just got over the railing, looked at the horizon, stepped off the ship, pointed my toes, kept my arms real close to me. I had already put the waist belt up under my armpits. I really don't know how deep I went, but I didn't think I was coming back up. And when I hit the surface, I was covered with ropes that had been hanging from the ship. That was the only time I panicked, and I thrashed around till I finally got away from all the ropes. And I started dog paddling, and after a little while, I heard someone crying for help, and I came upon a wounded soldier, and I asked him, "What's wrong?" And he shocked me when he said his legs are broke. And I really don't know how he ever kept himself afloat. And I took off my waist belt because I had not inflated it as yet under my armpits. And I felt comfortable dog paddling. I had nowhere to go. I was looking around to see where others were, but I saw no one. And I took the waist belt hoses. There were 2 compartments, and instead of using the CO2 charge. I used the hoses to inflate the two compartments, which were much larger than the CO2 charge would create. And I kept pushing him in front of me and just dog paddling and holding on to him. And suddenly, on the horizon, which I was able to see because I think the moon had started coming up, and there was that beautiful rescue ship, the was the HMT Campbell. It was a cargo ship, and when I got closer, I found a overturned lifeboat with a lot of guys hanging on, and we got the wounded guy that I had. We laid him on the hull of the ship, of the overturned lifeboat, and we finally got to the side of the Campbell, and it had a 30-foot, was 30 foot up to the deck. Anyways, I yelled up, and someone threw me a rope. I made a sling for the wounded guy. They hauled him up, and I started to climb on a rope ladder, and it just so happened the closest buddy I had met when I was stationed in Texas at the beginning of the war. He was on the next rope ladder, and he yelled to me, "I can't hold on," and fell back in the water. And I sort of had a smile on my face when the seaman on the deck yelled down to me. He yelled to me in his accent, wrap your arms to the ropes, laddie." And I finally made it to the deck, and they walked me down to the galley, stripped the clothing off of me, and gave me a burlap sack that contained a knit sweater with a letter sewed into it by the woman who made it, and a pair of tweed pants, slippers, woolen underwear, and here I am.
How did it feel to reunite with family after the event?
How did it feel being reunited with your family after the events on the Rona?
Well, I fell in love in my sophomore year with my wife. I met her during Christmas vacation in a small coffee shop. She was with some friends, and one of the friends asked me if I wouldn't walk her home because he had to go the other way to take his girlfriend home. And it was love at first sight, and I've never known any other woman since. However, she passed on in 2012, but we had a lot of good years together. And I've just been a lucky guy.
No. So what was going through your mind, like, as the ship was going down? And was there ever a moment where you thought, like, that was going to be it?
What were you thinking thinking about, sir, when the boat was going down? And did it ever come across your mind that you're going to die? This is it.
Well, when I came up from going down under the ropes and I started thrashing, there was a thought that passed my mind. I said, what is my Eva going to say when I don't come home? That was the exact thought at the time. But once I got away from the ropes, I knew I was going to make it somehow, some way, and I did.
What advice would you give a soldier today?
What advice would you give a soldier today?
What advice?
What advice about their service or maybe heading into combat? What advice would you give a soldier today?
Well, my opinion is we're very fortunate at this time to be able to feed all the arms and ammunition to another country to do the job. However, if they can't get the job done, we're going to have to get a group of military personnel from around the world to put a stop to what is developing, because this is history repeating itself, because back in 39, prior to 39, a British, I believe he was the ambassador to Germany, came back and said, all is well. Well, they immediately after that discussion took Poland in 39, and they didn't stop. By 41, they had attacked Russia. So history could repeat itself if we withdraw the support to Ukraine, and if all the other countries that have bellied up and sent tanks from Germany to Ukraine and arms and ammunition from other countries, I'm all for it. And perhaps if we even increase what we're doing right now, it might prevent any and all of you from having to get involved in joining the military, because Russia is not going to stop. That's my opinion.
Any other questions?
The first thing you did when you got home?
Me?
He asked, what was the first thing that you did when you got home?
Well, I really can't remember, but I do remember when we landed in New York and we were put on a barge and transferred across to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey for processing. I think I drank 3 fraps in a row.
Had the ship been in pristine condition, do you think that the effects of the bomb would have been as dire as they were?
If the ship would have been in better conditions, do you think that the effects of the bomb would have had the same impact on the ship if it was in better condition?
Well, the only thing that would have happened, we would perhaps had less loss of lives in abandoning the ship, because it had been more time for perhaps some other guys like me to help with the abandoning of the ship. But as far as what the bomb did, it would have done the same thing to the ship, excepting for what was available for abandoning the ship. We would have been able to handle it much better. Because, as I said, I could only get up to where the fire was in releasing the 5-man life rafts. The 5-man life rafts along where the cabins were, they never could get to them because of the fire. I don't remember they said there was approximately 122 5-man life rafts available, but they say overall approximately 70 got released. I'm sure there was a large number of them released in the afterdeck and similarly on the other side of the ship. But I only recently found out that figure. It wouldn't have made any difference. The ship still would have sunk.
What motivated you to help people when the Rona sank?
What motivated you to help others when the Rona was sinking?
Well, as I said, I worked in the shipyard before I went in the service, so I knew what I had to do, and I did it. GIs were running around, running up to the first sergeant, screaming, Smitty, what do I do? He says, get off the ship. And a lot of them were afraid to make the jump. And we had to push them off, throw them off, whatever, to get them off the ship. And we did a pretty good job of that. And as I said before, the only ones remaining were a lot of the wounded laying on the deck because there were no lifeboats to put them in. And I hoisted quite a few down in the water, made a nice slip knot so when it got down to the water line, somebody in the water was able to release the rope immediately and inflate the life belt that was under their armpits. How many of them made it? Some of them probably just rolled over face down and drowned. So I did what I could.
Is there anything you would want us to know about the people that were on that ship, or just
Is there anything you would want to say about the people or what happened that you haven't said yet?
Is there anything that you want to share with us about the people that were on that ship that you haven't shared with us yet?
If I had to,
Talk about the people that were on the ship. Were they great men, good men, families, relationships you had with them?
well, we had been selected from various air bases in the United States. They got radio men from a suburb of St. Louis. They got aerial gunners from Holligen, Texas. I mean, we were handpicked from all over the country and all brought together to Camp Patrick Henry in Virginia and just waited for the ship to take us eventually to China. We left Hampton Roads, Virginia on, I believe it was September 26th, and arrived in Oran, North Africa, 21 days later. We had an unbelievable crossing. We assembled from different harbors along the southern coast of the United States and sailed down to the lower part of Central America and then across to central North Africa and then up the coast to Gibraltar, where we entered the Mediterranean. And the most important thing of all, of the 100 and some odd ships in the convoy, we did not lose one. We did not run into any submarines in the entire crossing. The only time the Germans tried to get at us as we got close to Gibraltar. However, at that point, we had a lot of Navy, a lot of Army Air Corps protecting us, and all the ships made it into the Mediterranean.
Okay, I just got one admin note before the bell rings. I need you to remain seated here in the auditorium until the bell rings. We're going to wrap things up, but do not leave the auditorium until the bell rings. Sir, in our conversation, you mentioned during that 8-hour period, you did what you had to do. And I think today we use the term hero too loosely. You, sir, are an absolute hero. You thought about others. You didn't think about yourself. As mentioned, you were too busy trying to let go of the life rafts, okay? You were too busy trying to save others, okay? And when you stepped off, you weren't thinking about yourself, all right? And more so, once you was in the water, you saw someone with broken legs and you took off your life raft, not knowing how long you were going to be in the water, and you gave it up to a fellow soldier. All right, sir, you are an absolute hero. It wasn't just 8 hours. I appreciate you coming here today to spend the past hour with us and sharing your story. Can we please give him a round of applause? Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.